Good evening, everybody. My name is Todd Scholl. I'm the lead learner at the South Carolina Education Association Center for Educator Wellness and Learning. We call ourselves COOL, and thank you for being here tonight for another live stream. As always, you can find all of our live streams that we do on the COOL website at cool.us, at cewl.us. And of course, we would love to connect with you. You can go to the SCEA.org/connect. And if you look at the bottom of the screen, you can join our movement now and pay no dues until September. Just go to jointhescea.org or text the word join to 48744. We just announced this, which is our Educator Mindfulness Retreat. It's going to be held June 14th through the 16th in Black Mountain, North Carolina, at a place called the Quietude Retreat Center. It is a secular and science-based trauma-sensitive retreat designed by educators for educators. You can learn more about that at the COOL website. You go to cool.us/retreat, or just go to cool.us and look for the nav button at the top that says retreat. You can learn all about it and apply to attend if you are a public school teacher in South Carolina. And it's less expensive for members of the SCEA. So if you're not a member and you're thinking you want to go on this retreat, it'd be a great time to join now, because you get a significant discount on retreat costs if you are a member of the SCEA. So that's all the plugs that I have for tonight. I am really excited about our guest tonight. He's someone I've met on a couple of occasions and really respect the work that he's doing and the advocacy that he's doing for free speech and expression. His name is Josh Malkin. Josh joined the ACLU, or the American Civil Liberties Union of South Carolina, as a legal fellow in the fall of 2021, and was named a senior advocacy strategist after the completion of his fellowship. He comes to the ACLU deeply committed to advocating for racial and educational equity and protecting the rights of children. He earned his Juris Doctorate from Columbia Law School, graduating as a Stone Scholar and Public Interest Honoree. While pursuing his degree, he had the privilege of interning for Orleans Public Defenders, the Mississippi Center for Justice, the New York City Civilian Review Board. He also completed an externship with the NAACP Legal Defense and Education Fund, Incorporated. Prior to law school, Josh spent 5 years teaching middle school and high school math in New Orleans East. There he saw how American systems work in concert to maintain racial hierarchies. So without further ado, let's bring in Josh. Josh, how are you doing tonight?
Todd, I'm well, thanks. How are you?
I'm doing really well. I want to thank you for your work and your commitment to equity and justice and against censorship. And I know that's one of the major concerns that you have right now. Before we get started, can you talk? What did I miss in your bio? Is there anything that you needed to tell everybody about your work or about the ACLU before we dive deep into this the topic tonight?
No, I'm sorry it was obnoxiously long. Just that, the ACLU has an integrated advocacy model. So we have an advocacy department, a legal department. That's actually it right now. Ben, we are currently an 8-person shop. So trying to do as much as we can, but I know there are instances when we can't be everywhere we'd like to be.
Yeah. So let's talk about the thing that we've been talking about on this live stream and the SCEA, which is House Bill 3728. Is that you get the number right? 3728. I think you and I kind of have a similar view of this, which is I think they're trying to put lipstick on a pig and trying to make it sound innocuous. And of course, there's problems with it. I don't want to take up the mic. So you tell us, what is the issue you have with this bill?
So what issue don't I have with this bill, Todd? This is the evolution of the critical race theory craze. And after 18 hours of public testimony, largely against the bills last year, they did take critical race theory out of the bill. But here we find ourselves back again after hundreds of testifiers and testimonials last year. They came back this year, and the bill as you know, the bill got out of committee, and it was largely what they ended up with last year, out of the House committee, excuse me. And then on the House floor, the Freedom Caucus, which is kind of like the radical right flank that's no longer actually considered part of the GOP, added a bunch of amendments. So they added a private cause of action where a parent anywhere in the state, anywhere in the country could sue a school district if they believe them to be in violation of the law. They prohibited the teaching of current events. They allowed parents to opt their child out of any instruction that they want to opt them out of. And they just greatly expanded the ban on, instruction and trainings on gender and sexual orientation and gender identity. Bill passed out of the House despite those amendments. One of the more moderate champions of the bill got up there and said, I don't agree with how this bill is written now, realizing the animus that drives the bill, right? That's what I thought was helpful about those amendments, is like those amendments to me really highlight the animus behind it. There are folks out there right now who don't want their children learning about history. There are folks out there who want to be able to sue school districts immediately without talking to educators and administrators. There are folks who don't want educators talking to their kids about current events when that's, is a disservice to students when something horrific or monumental happens in our country, and the next day they go in and trust their educators to facilitate a discussion. But so it came out of the House, more radical than leaving the House committee. I'll pause there and continue, I guess, because we're not taking questions right now. So then it gets to the Senate. The Senate takes it up. And I think it's fairly clear from the get-go that senators don't have that much interest in this bill. I think that they have a greater understanding of what's going on here and how unnecessary it is, how it disrespects educators and students in a time when we certainly don't need to be disrespecting educators. The time doesn't exist, but in a moment where we have a record teacher vacancy, teacher shortage, certainly should not be anywhere near the top of our priority list. So it goes through the Senate subcommittee process, and the subcommittee is where folks will take, the senators will listen to public testimony. There are 2 subcommittee hearings where they take public testimony. It's roughly 38 folks against the bill and 8 in favor of the bill. That being said, it gets voted out of subcommittee and then goes to the full committee, where I honestly, I will, give folks the burden of the doubt. I think senators try to make the bill more reasonable. I don't think our senators, who are only senators part-time, who have other jobs, necessarily understand what's happening locally with censorship and efforts to ban books and censor curriculum. I don't know if they understand what's happening in other states that have similar laws. So what they did was they struck most of those more radical amendments. And then the bill passed out of the full committee. So what we're left with is still the Trumpian, executive order prohibited concepts. So even though they've now removed the language that I believe highlights the animus behind this bill, it doesn't matter, right? Because censors and folks who are trying to ban histories and identities aren't going to care what the final version of this bill says if it passes out of the Senate. They will charge into school board meetings without talking to educators and administrators, saying that they violated the law and that they're risking 5% of the school district's funding, which is the penalty that's currently in the bill. So it's tricky because I spend a good deal of my time trying to explain to reasonable people why the language of this bill doesn't matter. They'll look and say, okay, maybe we shouldn't be teaching some of these things. It seems like there's a protective process in place. And if you look at the language of the bill, there should be a protective process in place. It says that a parent, and only a parent, need to document evidence of trying to have a conversation with an educator and administrator. And if these folks were going to do that, we'd be having a different conversation. But I've been flying around the state chasing book bans, and that's not how these folks operate. What they do is they go into a school board meeting without talking to without trying to have a proactive, productive conversation with a librarian, and they tell school board members, you're distributing child pornography, and I'm going to have you arrested. If they haven't already talked to the sheriff. The police have twice gone to the children's section in the Greenville Public Library. I mean, these folks, with all due respect, are I think many of them are not well. And the fact that they can just like charge into school board meetings and tell these dedicated public servants, like, I'm going to have you arrested because you're distributing child, it's horrifying. And folks,
Right.
if both sides of the conversation aren't in the room, I've seen school boards act differently depending on, which perspectives are in the room.
We've seen these kind of bills go into place in other states, and what we see happening in many cases is where there's any gray area, educators get scared, school librarians get scared, and we actually spoke with some school librarians last week, and what we're starting to see is some self-censorship even now without the bill. Some school librarians are perhaps not ordering a book that maybe they would have before, or maybe they're taking something out of the library that they wouldn't normally have taken out. And then you've got also classroom teachers who have classroom libraries, and now they're being asked to go through and scrutinize every book, and some of them that they've been teaching with for decades. And so we're starting to see this self-censorship and this sort of culture of fear. And I agree with you, going back to your point about, I mean, this is bad enough in and of itself, this idea of putting this sort of culture of fear. It reminds me of I forgot, Dolores Umbridge when in Harry Potter, when she came in and she started implementing all these rules, and there was this chilling effect on what they could teach about magic and wizardry. Like there was this whole thing at Hogwarts where the students and the teachers were living under fear of this person instead of the freedom and beauty that they had before. And that's sort of where I see happening with these bills, is you've got people that have that kind of mindset who just want to control through fear. And if the bill is left ambiguous enough, then you leave openings for people like that to get into, like you said, the school boards, and teachers now scared that, hey, am I in violation of the law? Am I going to get in trouble with my district? Am I going to get arrested for having this type of book? And so they just self-censor before even the parent lodges the complaint.
Yeah, I think that's a really terrifyingly whimsical analogy. I love that. But I think, I think the prohibited concepts, you're right, are absolutely ambiguous, absolutely vague. I think even if they were concrete, again, it wouldn't matter, right? If someone doesn't want their child to learn about Rosa Parks, they will charge in there and say, my child can't learn about Rosa Parks under this provision, even if there's absolutely no connection between the language of the bill and that individual parent's or citizen's distaste.
Yeah. I'm not so what educators who are watching this and proponents of strong public schools, folks who are against censorship, what are some concrete things that they can do to fight back against this?
Yeah, so just a little update as to where we are in the legislative session. The Senate will have 9 days to round out the legislative year, and I still believe there are a lot of things on the list, good or bad, that are higher priority for them than this bill. That being said, like, leadership in this state is on the record as saying we care about educators. We realize there's a problem, and we want to respect, recruit, and retain educators. So the more that they hear from educators that this bill feels like an attack on their expertise and undermines their professionalism, I think that goes a long way. I can get you a link where folks can submit their testimony so I can make sure it lands on folks' desks. And that could be as anonymous as folks need it to be. I'm a teacher, school district would be helpful, but county if necessary. And I think folks, they can't have it both ways. They can't cater to this really loud radical minority calling for censorship and say that they care about recruiting and retaining our expert professional educators.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about the ACLU. I'm familiar from, so I remember back in the 80s, the ACLU was, I remember, prominently talked about in a lot of presidential campaigns, like as though it was like a pejorative to that the Democratic candidate had been a member of the ACLU or something like that. Talk a little bit about what the American Civil Liberties Union does, what their mission is, and what they do to protect free speech.
Yeah, and I'm glad you raised that because I'm sure there are still folks who feel like it's a pejorative to be a member of the ACLU. Um, yeah, so again, I mean, we are kind of a two-pronged shop at this point. So advocating for free speech, both at the legislator and legally. You know, I keep our legal team abreast of book bans and censorship attempts around the state, and you know, potentially a lawsuit coming soon. But tomorrow there is a bill that you know is designed to protect free speech in college campuses on college campuses. Based on its sponsors, I think they are worried about these individual sponsors are worried about backlash to conservative speech on college campuses. There have been a few instances recently on college and graduate campuses where there's been kind of a you know a notorious speaker or someone with like you know pretty radical conservative ideas, and there's just been backlash. And I get that motivation. I disagree with what those folks say, but I believe very firmly in their right to say it. And I think that like we as a you know a pretty polarized state are straying from this like these concepts that are really meant to protect democracy. You know, like the free exchange of ideas and the right to access information is like so fundamental to being able to like have discussions and advance ideas and solve problems. And the fact that we're seeing such explicit attempts to stifle that, to just completely undermine the First Amendment, is scary, right? And to your point, like I think what the radical conservative folks are great at, to give them their credit, is messaging, right? Because
Mm.
when I go into a school board meeting or a library board meeting and I say, "Hey, just letting you know that banning a book because you dislike the ideas within it is a violation of the First Amendment," that doesn't make me a radical, in my opinion, right? Like
Right.
saying that defending the very limited Black history that students are receiving in schools shouldn't make me a radical. I wish that I was fighting for more radical things, honestly. But I'm not. I'm not fighting for equity. I'm not even fighting for equality, right? Like I'm
Right.
fighting to maintain an already problematic status quo. I'm fighting
Right.
to try to make sure librarians aren't harassed, and the fact that that makes me a radical,
Right.
it's honestly a testament to their messaging.
Right. And that shows you, so the Overton window has shifted so far to the right that yes, that standing up for your school librarian now makes you a Marxist indoctrinator or something along those lines.
Right.
It's and the irony of the Freedom Caucus being named the Freedom Caucus is one of the most amazing things. Like the people that want to control women's bodies and control what's in your library, and control what you read, and is it's an amazing play of words to call themselves the Freedom Caucus.
Yeah, yeah, it's absurd. I mean, the same people who are sponsoring tomorrow's bill like would have the word equity criminalized, right? Like legitimately, like sponsored that bill last year. So yeah, I mean, trying to hold folks responsible for ideological hypocrisy, like I think we need to call folks out on that. But it's not the answer, in my opinion. Like the answer is once you become informed, like try to inform two other people, because what we're hearing from elected officials is it's 10 to 12% of my constituents that are really loud and are gonna vote, right? So
Right.
if you are someone who cares about protecting the freedom to read, who cares about protecting like students' ability to learn about Black history, like please let some other folks who may not know what's going on, let them know what's going on.
Yeah. Josh, one of the things you alluded to, which I'd like you to kind of talk a little about a little bit more. Um, we've heard the term cancel culture and that kind of thing. And I think sometimes we don't, I think sometimes we don't really approach that issue well, in a nuanced way. Like, in other words, like you mentioned, like a conservative person coming to a campus, and obviously you and I would probably disagree with 99.9% of what's coming out of their mouth, but we also see the need to uphold freedom of speech and say, listen, you may not agree with it, but then there's the other side saying, well, if somehow it results in violence or results in my oppression, then so how do we have that conversation? How do we find that balance between protecting folks who feel marginalized and oppressed by certain types of speech, but also saying, listen, even though that there may be some truth in that, the value of free speech is also really important. How do we talk about that in this world where on Twitter, like, there's just immediate outrage if you don't conform to one side or the other? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's a great question because I do believe that a lot of this language is so inherently harmful, and like most of it in a way that I can't fully understand, right? No one's attacking me, my identity on Twitter. So I acknowledge I can't fully understand how harmful a lot of this language is. I mean, I think what I'll say is like, if somehow, folks who are harmed by that, or those of us who disagree with it, were able to or wanted to suppress it, then it's just like fomenting, right? And address we can't address the harms. We can't challenge the arguments and the premises that these folks are putting forth if they're not allowed to put them forth. And I don't have I don't have a perfect answer, because even as I'm saying this, like it is so hard, even, in my skin, hearing a lot of what these folks say at some of these hearings. So I don't know I have a great answer. I just think as what I'm seeing happen is, as some of these arguments get more and more offensive and radical, I think folks who didn't understand before are starting to connect some of the dots and get a sense of like how dangerous the evolution of this faction is. And I think if that wasn't happening publicly, it'd be harder for us to, shine a light on it.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned that the right is really effective at messaging, and I think sometimes what the left does is says, well, let's not even respond to it, let's not even acknowledge it. And I think one of the issues that I see happening there is then when it comes to something like critical race theory, if they're the only ones talking about it, then that becomes the working definition in most people's minds of what it is. And then there's all this misunderstanding and misinformation that's spread, with nobody really saying, yeah, go ahead and say that. You can come on my podcast, say it, and then let's talk about it and really see if it holds up to scrutiny. Like, we'll steel man the argument as best we can, but let's have that real conversation about what you're saying and whether there's real substance behind it or not. Because in most cases, I've found there's very little substance, or it's conspiracy theory or conjecture or sort of clever wordplay, but there's nothing substantive there. It's just misleading people. And it's really just what I see is they're really good at generating fear and division and then mobilizing that energy into elections.
Right.
So another issue I wanted to bring up with you is someone that I follow on social media brought this issue up, that there are a lot of educators in South Carolina who are in the LGBTQ plus community who feel like they aren't able to, that they have to hide their identity in the school setting. And it's not to say that they want to talk about their sexuality, but for example, when I was teaching, it was known who I was married to. I wore a ring. I might have a picture of my wife and kids on my desk. It was just known, this guy's married to this person. And it wasn't something I ever felt fear of, or something that wasn't anything I ever had to hide. But I think there's a lot of people that are in communities, in certain communities here in South Carolina, who feel that they have to hide that part of themselves, and that double standard is incredibly unjust and unfair. What are some things that we can do? What are some laws in place, or some things that we can do to help advocate for those human beings who feel like they're living in fear, and in some cases, losing their jobs as a result of their identity.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, like I'm just so sorry that this is where we are in time. This is when we are in time. Two, like everyone's district is different, and I think folks have a sense, folks have a much more nuanced understanding of what they need to do to be safe in their district. Which again, like I'm sorry I have to say that, but like not every district in South Carolina is created equally. And three, hopefully without crossing the line into giving legal advice, Title VII under Supreme Court precedent protects you. There can't be an adverse employment decision based on your sexual orientation or your gender identity. So there's that. I mean, I'll also say, like, there was, I'm not sure if you heard about this, the teacher in Charleston recently, right? And I don't know all the details, so I don't want to misspeak. But a teacher in Charleston allegedly, told their students they were transitioning, right? And it's,
Okay, yeah,
I think,
I heard about that.
Yeah, and some, obviously, like the response that came from Moms for Liberty and the school board was just really disgusting. But there were some folks in the education world who were like that, that teacher didn't go about it the right way. And again, my answer for that, and for also like curricular censorship, is like the answer is more training, right? If like teachers should go into the school year knowing their rights, knowing the best way to talk to their students about their sexual orientation, gender identity, whatever it is. And the fact that like these bills are also trying to eliminate trainings that would do just that, it's just exacerbating the problem. So yeah, I mean, again, it's just one of these situations where I wish I had something really, comforting to say, but we are at a scary place in time for a lot of South Carolinians.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of educators for a variety of different reasons who feel this fear. And I would just encourage all of them to, and it sounds self-serving, but I do think being part of the SCEA is really important, because you do have that help desk, you do have that legal counsel that you can go to. You do have the liability insurance, that kind of thing. So I really strongly encourage anybody who's watching who is in the education world to consider joining the SCEA for that purpose, for that type of protection, but also for the capacity to be surrounded by other people, like-minded people, who can give you guidance and support, and who can come and be there to support you directly. What are some other issues in South Carolina that you see either now currently happening or on the horizon that you're concerned about, Josh?
Yeah, I mean, I think the Parental Bill of Rights, which is kind of, the Mom for Liberty flagship legislation, which kind of combines a lot of censorship and don't say gay type language. That is still out there. I think there's a kind of a renewed push in those circles for that legislation to get a hearing. And all the legislation, all the horrific legislation you see moving elsewhere in Missouri, Texas, Florida, Tennessee, that all exists in South Carolina. And I'd say part of the reason that it doesn't move when we'd expect it to is like there are really terrific advocates around the state, courageously showing up to voice their opposition to these attacks on humanity. But next year is an election year, and this radical fact, I don't believe they're large, and I actually believe they are shrinking, but they will just get louder. So next year, with it being an election year, maybe some of these become hotter button issues as folks don't want to risk being primaried. But I'd say again, like the counter to that for folks who don't want to see that type of thing happen in South Carolina is let two other people know, right? We're not going to use the tactics they use, but if we are more numerous, which we are, and we voice our opposition, I think that's how we keep some of these really horrific attacks at bay.
Yeah, I mean, you obviously follow Tennessee. We see what's happening under Ron DeSantis in Florida. heard about from some colleagues today about some things happening in Arkansas. I mean, so there are all of these things happening across the country, like you said, and it feels like there's just this sort of national sort of these think tanks, whether it's Moms for Liberty or whatever type of group, or the Heritage Foundation, trying to just like, let me see if we can find any way in to pass some type of legislation. And it's just odd to me, like, you've mentioned this a couple of times, that we're in 2023, and it feels like we're going back to, like, trying to go back to 1953 or 1963. And one of my concerns is you've seen Trump and Nikki Haley and folks on the right, as we're gearing up to 2024, making this whole thing about trans rights and grooming and indoctrinating kids and woke, which that woke has just been bashed over the public's head as a way of just sort of mischaracterizing progressive values. It is scary because I feels like, instead of talking about issues that actually matter to people, like global warming, which is going to have an effect on everybody, on the economy, inflation, things like that, that we're talking about these culture war issues that really seems like they should have been settled decades ago, and now they're reemerging, and now we're having to go back and fight, and which is why I think it's so critical that folks get to know the work that you're doing, because those battles are coming back and resurfacing. How can somebody get involved with the ACLU if an educator or a South Carolinian wants to get involved with the ACLU? How do they do that?
Yeah, can I speak to your point real quickly though?
Oh, sure. Yeah, please do. Yeah.
I can 100% agree. I'd say like the two most enjoyable hours in the State House I had this year were listening to two Republican senators talk about insurance for like rental boats, right? I'm like, this could be the most boring thing I've ever heard, but it feels like what y'all should be doing, right? Like,
right.
This it sounds like there's a problem here that y'all are trying to solve, and that's what y'all should be doing, is addressing real problems. And just to get to like, when are we in time? I think that so many of these folks who are parroting these causes don't have an idea of what the end game is. And I don't know that I do either. Right? I don't know where all this is headed, because I'm so, I'm like kite in the hurricane, doing what I can to try to stop it in the moment. But I honestly think that this is probably headed towards like theocracy, right? Like, these folks want to dismantle public ed. And I think you would legitimately have some representatives right now tell you that they are pro-theocracy. Like, if there was a study done on the number of times like God is mentioned on the floor versus 15 years ago, I'd be shocked if it's not exponentially higher. So as folks think maybe this isn't so bad, maybe this isn't so bad. One, it's all terrible. Please believe me, it's all terrible. Like, two, if these folks get what they want, if our officials cater to the flavor of the month, they're not going away. Like, this faction isn't going away until we stand up to them. So, I don't really think there's no compromising with this agenda. This agenda is heading towards dismantling anything equitable and implementing theocracy.
It feels like on the right, you've got those who do want to move towards theocracy. So they're driven by these religious, philosophical values. They would love to see us just, be a theocracy. And then those using them saying, well, they're useful because that helps us get votes, because there's not like those who want, to continue to lower the tax burden on corporations and don't want anything like universal health care, don't want to do any kind of like, environmental regulations.
Right.
Those who benefit from that, who are like full-on capitalists looking to profit as much as they possibly can, utilizing those who wanted a theocracy to get them elected, because they know if we lose them, even though they're financially might be, voting against their best interests, as long as we can keep them hooked in through this culture war, through the trans thing, the grooming thing, the indoctrination thing, the CRT thing, we keep them hooked in and voting for us, then we get enough of the vote that then we can continue to keep taxes low on corporations and ignore essentially the needs of the people.
100%, 100%. Yeah, and to tie those things together, I don't follow everything as closely as I should, but like the scout coming to Columbia and bringing like, however much money and however many jobs to the Midlands, and the Freedom Caucus got up there and was like, we don't want these jobs because Scout like has DEI practices, right? So just to highlight your point, I think it's a great flag. I think some of these huge capitalist forces are just exactly kind of tapping into the theocratic movement and puppeteering when it's beneficial to them. Yeah.
Right. So this is like cynical component of it that's just merely saying, well, yeah, we'll say whatever those people want to hear about trans people. We don't really care. Like we don't really care whether gay people get married or whether trans people have rights. We don't really care about that. But if it turns out that if we press this button, this woke button enough in the election, we find that voters gravitate to us and that motivates people to get out there to vote. And then so we get enough votes and then we can do whatever we want in the state house in terms of legislation to make things easier for us and increase our profits. And it's hard for me to understand why there's a lot of folks who can't see that. But I think that if you want a theocracy and your idea is, that's the number one thing. Money is not important. What's important is that these values that I care about get put into public policy. Because I'm doing God's work. It's just such a powerful mix in politics to overcome. And like you said, it's a matter of just having these kind of conversations with people. I think that's the only way.
And I think social media, makes it all the more like dangerous and hard to follow because, the Freedom Caucus can get sat down by their colleagues 40 times in a row and then get up, on social media, claim what a victorious night it was for them. And if you're not one of the, unwell people who choose to be at the State House every day, you have no idea that what they're saying is a complete misrepresentation of what actually just happened at the State House. So these folks are going to campaign on, maybe this is how campaigns always work. I don't know, but they're going to complain on like a lot of falsehoods, and who knows if there will really be people out there who have the ability to meaningfully bring their attention to the truth. I don't know. Social media makes it really challenging.
Yeah, and Tamara said, she's one of the school librarians who was on our live stream last week, said that this is an attack on public ed to reduce support for public schools so they can push private, which is I think this is like almost like the last stand for democracy is the protection of public schools, because it feels like, if they can dismantle public schools and funnel the money to private entities, then it's like the people who want a theocracy get what they want, because now their tuition to their Christian private schools covered, and they can bring more people into those Christian private schools. And then you've got and when you weaken democracy, which is exactly what you would do by dismantling public schools, then it's harder. It makes it so much harder for the people to fight back and push back because they don't have the knowledge and the education to effectively fight back. So this feels like this attack on public schools feels like we're at a really important moment in American history where we're seeing public schools attacked everywhere, and we have to come together to fight back. And Colleen says, so many bad actors only see dollar signs when they see the kids we serve. They deserve better. That's why our work for children cannot stay in our four walls of our school building. That's right. Thank you, Colleen, for tuning in. It's always good to hear. Colleen's one of our favorite people.
Sure. Yeah. How's this camera?
Huh?
I'm sorry.
I asked you a question earlier, and then I totally forgot what it is now. I've been trying to think of it while I'm talking. But
the answer
anyway.
is Tamara Cox. Tamara Cox is my hero, is the answer to any question.
Yeah. So but I asked you a question and I can't remember what it was. But anyway, we'll move on. Colleen says she wouldn't miss it for the world. Yeah. Oh yeah, Tamara's co-hosting tonight. So how do you get involved with the ACLU? So like someone wants to get involved with the ACLU, they know about you, they want to help you out, they want to support you. How do they do that?
So Tamara's gonna make me be a good employee here and pull up our website to make sure I'm giving you the right instructions. So you're gonna go to the ACLU of South Carolina webpage, which you can get to just by Googling ACLU of South Carolina. That is actually a question I should absolutely know the answer to. Please don't up this. Oh, there we go. There's a sign up tab at the bottom of the mountains graphic where you can sign up to receive our emails.
That's aclusc.org is the website. So they're hiring a communications director. So anybody out there who's into communications,
yeah.
So like, what are some ways people can advocate with the ACLU? What are some opportunities for them?
Yeah, so I will also plug the joint venture, actually, really of Tamara, Colleen, and I. We just hit 1,000 followers tonight on Freedom to Read SC. So big night for Freedom to Read SC. And I will tell you that is an excellent way to advocate with the ACLU and with a bunch of other great orgs. The SCEA is a member of Freedom to Read. The South Carolina Association of School Librarians is a founding member of Freedom to Read. And the way Freedom to Read SC works is we will get, and that's on Facebook, Freedom to Read SC on Facebook. We will catch whispers of book bans or attempted book bans. And then, we will reach out to our member orgs who are kind of spread throughout the state. If you think about the way that the SCEA is set up and SCASL and the League of Women Voters and the American Association of University Professors, like 22 really great nonpartisan groups. And we will kind of get a little group together in that area to fight back against the attempted book bans. And you just get like these really incredible local groups of people who are so bought into ensuring that their school district like remains an inclusive place. So yeah, I think that is like the quickest way to advocate with the ACLU right now. When the legislative session ends, I know we're going to make a more concerted effort to also be in the criminal legal reform space. So folks can, I'm happy to like drop, if Colleen wants to drop my ACLU email address in there, I'm always happy to have folks reach out to me directly. And we have a Zoom call about ways to get involved. And if it's not an issue that we are working on directly, it's likely that someone in our office knows someone in the space. So always happy to be that connector as well.
Josh, I want to, as we kind of like move towards the end here, it just occurred to me that I'm really curious about you and let me first start off with this simple question. What are some books that influenced you? Since we're talking about freedom to read, what are some books that influenced you to become involved in this work and have influenced your thinking around this work?
Yeah, the answer is a lack of books. I think like I grew up in a progressive part of New York, and I went K through 16 without any understanding about how systems work to impact, different races and equitably, right? Like I graduated a small liberal arts school outside of Boston, took social psychology classes, and just had no idea, was asleep. If I'd like to use awake and asleep that way. I was unaware of how systems operated. I was asleep. And then I started teaching. And I remember, my first diversity training, and it was uncomfortable and I wasn't ready, right? Like my K through 16 education hadn't prepared me to even like listen to conversations about equity. So when like, but like that discomfort was so formative for everything I've done since then, because like that discomfort is crucial for individual growth and understanding. So and then I stepped into the classroom, right? And I was at like a 98% free and reduced lunch school, and it was really interesting because I had a pretty even split of Black, Vietnamese, and Honduran students. Um, and just like seeing how their daily lives were impacted by all of these systems, I was like, I didn't learn much about the world in my K through 16 education. And that's when I began reading. So, like trying to think of titles that.
It's always hard when someone asks you and you're not prepared. Like later on, you can think of 100, but like think of just one or two that come up that really were eye-opening for you or shifted your thinking.
Yeah, I mean, Between the World and Me, I read that after teaching for a few years, and that's a really powerful book. Um, I can picture the covers, but like I don't want to mess up the titles and disrespect the authors. The Schoolhouse Gate, I think is maybe I read that one during law school, but it's about how kind of like the Supreme Court has maintained segregation in public schools, through cases since Brown, right? And like now we're in this moment where they like they may overturn affirmative action. But I think, I wish I was a bigger reader, Tamara. I'm sorry, I don't read as much as I should. It's more like listening, right? I try to be a better listener because, I think that's where real learning and deeper understanding of how other folks' lives are impacted by these systems designed to benefit me, and I don't know. I need to read more, Todd, is the answer.
Who are, who are
I
some,
barely.
who are some thinkers? Who are some thinkers or some thought leaders in your world? I mean, some like I'll just throw out some of mine are like Paulo Freire, Noam Chomsky, Dr. Cornel West. Some folks. Who are some people that have been influential? It could be even like your parents, or just who are some folks that were influential in as you formulated. Obviously, how does Josh Malkin end up at being a leader for ACLU in the state of South Carolina and fighting for justice and for these values? Like what I hear your story and how you saw things, and I think it's a testament to you that you saw injustice, and that you didn't just say, well, but it doesn't affect me. So, there's a shift there when you see injustice, other people suffering injustice, and there's something in your conscience that says, well, I can't sit idly by while other human beings are experiencing that. I need to step up and do something about it, even if it doesn't affect me in the same way or my family in the same way. But who are some folks that have influenced you in your life?
Not to cop out of my like lack of diving into philosophy yet again, but I will say like I would like name students, right? Because you can't, in my experience, you couldn't be, and if I couldn't effectively teach my students without trying first to understand like how they were that day and like why they were that way. So like as books and I ended up taking critical race theory. So like I'll shout out Kimberly Crenshaw, and I'll also shout out Professor Kevin Brown, who's at USC, who definitely like reinforced and helped me see the inner workings of systems in a way that my students first brought my attention to. I'll remember my first year of teaching, I taught both 8th grade math and accelerated algebra for a group of 8 students. And I looked down one day, and there's like this always really hardworking, like quiet, polite student of mine was just like scribbling over and over, like my back hurts, right? Like it was like she wasn't doing her work the way she normally did, and like she just kept writing my back hurts, right? So it's just like things like that make make you see things in a way that you hadn't before, that I was never forced to think about, if my back ever hurt when I was a kid, my mom would have had me at the doctor before I could even tell her, right? It was just, the access to healthcare was so immediate. So
Right.
seeing that, it took, it really sadly and unfortunately took for me to see other children living a life so different from my own to be like, wait a second, like something is not right here. And then, that turned me to books that I've since embarrassingly forgot their titles. But like, I think it's because the more meaningful moments with those systems were like seeing my students be forced to navigate them like that.
Yeah. Yeah. That's powerful, Josh. I just want to say on behalf of everybody watching and folks, thank you for what you're doing. Like we don't win every battle. It's frustrating sometimes, and I'm sure there's days that you get really discouraged and down about what you see and about the lack of progress, or actually sometimes feeling like we're stepping backwards. But for you to stand in the way of folks who want to pull us back, for you stepping up and standing in their way and doing everything you can to fight for freedom, to fight for truth, to fight for educators and the young people of this state to have a bright future, because they can't have a bright future when we're censoring the truth and censoring books, and they don't have access to materials that represent them and that explain the wide range of human experience. Like it's an important fight, Josh, and I want to thank you for doing it. I want to thank you and the ACLU for standing up and doing that.
Well, I appreciate that, and I also want to say, like, the only successes I ever have, and it's easy for me to get bogged down in what feel like the losses, but we actually do have quite a bit of success, and it's because like folks are doing it together. So the reason that like book bans are largely not happening in South Carolina is thanks to these amazing communities that form locally to fight back against book bans and be the presence in the room. The fact that censorship bill didn't pass last year when it passed everywhere else is because the Pro-Truth Coalition built up informed enough folks to fill 16 hours of public testimony. So I appreciate that, but like we do this, we are successful together.
Yeah, yeah. I know there's so many educators that, one of the things that's really hard, I think, for advocacy when it comes to education is the people that are the best advocates are busy teaching. They're worn out. Like, I mean, they're getting up at 6 or 7 in the morning and like going to school, teaching all day and staying after school with kids, trying to help young people become the best versions of themselves. And they're worn out. And the idea of adding, advocacy on top of that, it's a lot. But I think your point is really, really important, that as many as possible, we need educators to step up in their local communities and at the state level and the national level to protect the institution of public schools, because it is absolutely essential to the survival of our democracy. But any final thoughts, Josh, before we wrap up?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've mentioned this earlier. Like, we need to call out ideological hypocrisy. We need to call out when language and attacks are harmful, for sure. But I think the change happens by us informing people who don't currently know. I think that the majority of people in South Carolina don't want all of these really hateful, discriminatory attacks on folks. And it's just, it's a lack of knowledge. I don't blame people for. If your humanity, your history is not directly under attack, you don't work at the State House, I don't know why you would know necessarily. So if you are someone who knows, please go tell 2 or 3 of your friends, send them to the ACLU, the SCEA, Freedom to Read, anywhere they are trying to advocate, because it really is a strength in numbers thing.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Josh, so much. And thanks to the ACLU for all you're doing. Have a great night, man. Thanks so much.
Always.
Take care. I want to thank Tamara Cox for watching, Nat, and Colleen, and Keneal, and let's see who else was watching tonight. I think that's about it. That's all the ones who commented. But thank you for watching. If you are still watching, I just want to remind everybody that you can speak out against the voucher schemes, which would funnel money from public schools to private. You go to the scea.org/S39 and you can speak out about that. You can also speak about this bill, H7328, which is the censorship bill, and you can do that at the scea.org/pro-truth. You can connect with us at the scea.org/connect. And of course, you can join us right now with no dues until September. So you got no dues in April, May, June, July, and August. No dues till September if you join today. And you can look at the bottom of the screen here. It's jointhescea.org or text the word join to 48744. I want to remind everybody, we just launched this today. If you are interested in going to a retreat, this is only for public educators in South Carolina. That includes support staff, so bus drivers, cafeteria staff, custodial workers, admins, school psychologists, and of course, classroom educators. If you're interested, that's June 14th through the 16th in Black Mountain. It's going to be at a retreat center called Quietude. It is a secular science-based retreat that is designed by educators for educators. You can learn more at cool.us/retreat. Just go to the Cool website and you'll see the retreat link there. So yeah, we'd love to have you. Very, very affordable. For members of the SCEA, it's like $100 for 2 nights of accommodations and includes your meals as well, and a book and all the trainings and yoga and everything. So very, very affordable retreat. If you're interested, head on over to the Cool website and check that out. Let's see, what else do we have? Colleen wanted to share all those actions are at the scea.org/action center. Nat says, thank you all. This was great. You're very welcome, Todd. And if you're on the front lines, join your union, join the scea.org. I'm so proud to be a part of a union and part of an organization that in this state, the only one that's out there talking about these issues, LGBTQ issues, civil rights issues, social justice issues. We're the ones on the front lines talking about these, not hiding away from our values. We're the only association for educators that isn't afraid to talk about the fact that we're a union and we are affiliated with the NEA. We're the state affiliate of the largest labor union in the United States with over 3.2 million members, the National Education Association. I want to thank them for helping to bring you programming like this. It's through a grant from the NEA that we are allowed to do this kind of work, and I want to thank them. I want to thank Todd Jake, our executive director, Sherry East, our president, our board, and everybody at the SCEA who's so supportive of the work that we're doing at the Center for Educator Wellness and Learning. I hope you have a good evening. I'll be on the road this week doing in-person sessions, so we're not going to have another live stream this week, but we've got a lot of great live stream events coming up. So just stay tuned to the SCEA's Facebook pages and the Center for Educator Wellness and Learning pages, and we'll be posting information about those coming up soon. So I want to thank Josh Malkin from South Carolina ACLU again for being our guest tonight. Thank you for tuning in. Have a great week.